Okay. Oh, shoot, I'll be right back.
Okay. So it looks like, hi Sharon. So it looks like
myself.
You don't have to mute yourself. It looks like this is going to be a really small group today. It seems like the link wasn't working. So anyway, welcome Eva and Sharon to the Writing Workshop Wednesdays. So it looks like it might just be us today, but that's okay because we can have a discussion and I think it'll be really nice. And maybe some other people will be able to watch the recording later and enjoy that. So, and hi, Deborah. We're just getting started. It's kind of a small group today. Ivea just asked me a question, what does animacy mean? Because I originally wanted to do this today's workshop about the grammar of animacy, which is a chapter from Robin Kimmerer's book, Writing Sweetgrass. And so animacy is basically something being alive. And how does our language show that thing, what is alive and what's not alive? And as I said to Ivea a couple minutes ago, I'm not feeling super great right now because I got my second COVID vaccine, yay! And my body is working hard to defend itself. So I'm very tired and this is a topic I'm really, really excited about. So I'd rather just put that till next week when I can make it be really good. But basically, what she talks about in this chapter in the book is how in her, the language of her culture and in other indigenous languages, it's more clear about the language is, I'm sorry, I'm just tired. Like for example, oh, did someone write something in the chat? Deborah says you're not getting any sound. You guys can hear me though, right? Yeah, you might just want to check your settings.
I also know that lately Zoom has been having sound and sight things. Same thing was happening yesterday in Jack's thing. I think maybe logging off and logging back in can sometimes fix it, but it seems like it's a Zoom problem lately.
I'm just typing that into the chat because she couldn't hear you say that.
You're right. Sorry. That's so silly of me.
Okay, but yeah, basically one of the things that she talks about is how English is a very noun-based language. I think something around 70% of the words are nouns, which makes sense for a culture that's very obsessed with things and material objects, whereas the language of the Potawatomi language is very verb-based. So for example, instead of a river being a thing, like an object, it was to be a verb to be a river. And just all these ways which their language shows the aliveness of the world and our relationship to it. And one thing that she's suggested is using different ways. For example, she thought of the word ki as a pronoun instead of it, which could signify, even if something is not, male or female, or if we don't know what it is, we could use that to refer to like a tree or an animal or whatever. And so I think it would be really fun to experiment with using, sorry. I think it would just be really fun to experiment with using those words.
Rebecca, would you repeat how much of the Potawatomi language is nouns compared to the English language? I've forgotten, I didn't catch the percentage.
I need to double check this actually. I don't remember for sure, but I think I remember in the book it says it's around 70%. And in English,
In English.
It's English. This might not be exactly right, but what I remember is in English is about 70% nouns, and in Potawatomi it was about 70% verbs.
Ah, okay, thank you.
I'm not sure of the exact number, but it was something like that. And so I'd really like to do more on that next week when I'm feeling a little bit better, and hopefully the link is working again so we can get more people in on that conversation, which to me is really fascinating and I think is very important because I just think it's really interesting how different languages can shape the way that we see the world and how we understand it and understand ourselves in it.
I absolutely concur.
It's interesting to me to think about that, like what this the certain I wonder what it would be like if a language were mostly based off of descriptive words. Like what
Like
would that,
adjectives.
yeah, like what would
Adjectives
that,
and adverbs. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because we're talking about nouns versus verbs, object versus, something that's being. But yeah, what would it be like if there's a language that was very heavily focused on descriptive words and adjectives and adverbs and these very precise ways that things are. And this is something that I think about a lot too, because I think in English, we're not supposed to use too many adjectives or descriptive words. A lot of times it can be kind of seen as a bad thing if something is too flowery, or I think purple prose is how they describe it sometimes, if it's just too much that way. And I think that's kind of more of a modern style, is to have everything very very
Spare.
distinct and spare, especially compared to older writings.
Yes. This conversation reminds me of, I believe it's the Inuits have names for all different kinds of snow. We say snow, sleet, whatever, and they have lots of different names for the kinds of snow, the consistency. So different languages have, obviously have different focuses. So this is a lovely concept, and I'm glad that you're going to hold it over to when there are more participants, because I think it will be really fun to think about trying to animate some of our writing and use more verbs rather than nouns, or even adjectives and adverbs, just to give our writing life.
what you said just now about the different words for snow, that was sort of what was in my mind when I'd mentioned a language based off of adjectives and adverbs. And it makes me wonder, would that be a culture that's more about the sensory experience? And like, suppose that we had more words for the different kinds of sounds we hear, or the different smells. I've heard people say in nature journaling that it's difficult to describe a smell, but what if there was a richer vocabulary there? Or maybe if, like, just thinking about the example with the snow, maybe then it's about a culture that's also really, really focused on changes in the environment and really focused on what those mean. So that, like, when they can describe the precise shade that a leaf changes, or maybe the precise feeling of the air around them. I don't know. This is such an exciting conversation. I'm really glad that you brought this up, Rebecca, just about like imagining, at first when you said like a vocabulary that's more based on verbs, my initial thought was, oh, so maybe that culture is more about doing things. But then when you say that it's about like seeing what other things in nature do as alive, that's even cooler.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, about just that there are so many different things that we could have words for, and that there how many things there's so many words in the English language and in other languages, but it makes me think about how many words there are that don't exist, or very specific things that maybe it would be useful to have a word for, but we don't. And when Sharon was talking about the snow, it made me think about too how language can be such a place-based kind of thing. And of course, a culture that lives in a very snowy place might have more a distinctive vocabulary than in other places. Or if we live, whatever it is that's special about the place where we live, what kind of words do we need to describe what's going on there? And that's so important for our relationship to our environment and the place where we live.
That is such a good point. It'd be fun. I don't even know how one would do this, but it'd almost be fun to take like a sampling of the most common words used in a region during a certain time of year and compare it to a different one. Like, I wonder what the most common descriptive words or verb words or even noun words are in New York right now compared to San Francisco, and how that might change, like what the profile is, what the focus is. That'd be really fun to explore.
Oh, that's really interesting. Do you mean like in nature journals specifically, or just of like all kinds of things?
Ooh, both. Because I wonder, because I know that I believe, is it snowing still there, or is there still snow there?
We did have snow, not yesterday, but the day before, and I think it's supposed to snow tomorrow. But yesterday it was about like almost 70 degrees. So it's that time of year here where it could be, it's like any particular day, it could be summer or winter.
That's cool. I guess what I mean, like, is, for example, I wonder in New York if you have a richer vocabulary to describe the winter than we might here in San Francisco, or at least what the winter means in terms of like snow and cold. Because since it doesn't snow here, we might have different words. Like maybe we have more words for foggy weather. I don't know.
Probably it's not, it's very foggy around San Francisco, isn't it?
Well, it used to be. It used to be more foggy. And now people, I think that that's another way that the vocabulary is changing, is that now people have more words for the sun around here, because the fog started to fade around the turn of the millennium, around 2000. At least that's what I noticed. But I mean, I was 14 at the time. So people have more words for, oh, it's such a lovely day. It's such a sunny day. And we used to have different words for the fog, like it's misty today, or it's drippy today, or the air smells slightly, oh, it's hard to remember the different words because it's been so long. And then somebody named the fog Carl on Twitter, and we were like, that's not the name of, all of us who grew up here were like, that's not what the fog is called. It's just called the fog. Carl. Anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so for those of you who just got here, we have a smaller group today, so we're kind of just having a discussion. I started off, I was originally going to do this topic this week, but I'm going to hold that off until next week. Hopefully you can have some more people. But we were just kind of discussing these ideas about what does animacy mean, and how does our language, the language that we use, affect how we observe and experience nature, and how does it change in different places and things like that. So I just want to go over, this is our 7th writing workshop now. And so we've done all of these things so far. And then I have a few discussion questions that we could talk about. If any of those are interesting to you, we could dive into those. But today we could also go off in, any other directions if, we find something interesting that you all want to talk about. And then we can share some writing at the end too, if anyone wants to. So our first workshop, we talked about writing to observe and writing to think, really grounding this in the idea that writing is a tool to help us learn, not just to communicate or to write an essay for school or something that will be judged. It's a tool for us to help us learn. And then the next time I read a sample from Rachel Carson, The Sense of Wonder, and we practiced searching for things that make us feel a sense of wonder. The next time was about Aldo Leopold, And then we did interviewing a creature and talked about the differences between empathy and anthropomorphism. And then for St. Patrick's Day, I found an Irish naturalist named Mary Ward from the 1800s, and who wrote a book about using a microscope to learn about nature. And last time we talked about how to avoid cliches and how to use more unique or creative descriptions in our writing that help. And we talked about how using cliches can be helpful if you want to get across a simple idea that will make sense to other people. But we also want to write in a way that shows what's unique about our own experience. So that's a quick recap of all the workshops we've done so far. First of all, are there any questions about anything we've talked about so far in any of the workshops, or any thoughts that anyone wanted to share and didn't have a chance to? Hi, Christian.
Yes, hi Rebecca, hi you all. You recorded this sessions, and I didn't find number 5 and the last one on YouTube, or on YouTube. Is this correct?
Yes, I'm a little bit behind on getting those two up. I'm sorry about that. I have to, sometimes I can just upload it right away, but sometimes I need to edit parts of it. So I'm a little bit behind because of that. So I apologize.
That's okay. I only thought perhaps I had overlooked something.
No,
Okay.
no, it's not you.
Thank you.
And some other questions. And yes, congratulations on your interview. I haven't listened to it yet, but that's great. Just kind of general about nature journaling. How much experience do you have in nature journaling? There might be people here who are newer to it. What is it that you love about it? You know, what is it that we get from it? Why do we do this? What are your biggest challenges or struggles with using words in your nature journaling? What would you like to work on, or how would you like to grow your skills using these words and using writing as part of your nature journaling toolkit? And then how do you like to use words in your nature journal? And do you have any ideas or tips that you'd like to share with the rest of the group? And then if you would like to have some time to, usually we have some time for writing, but what I was wondering today, we could share any writing that you've done from your nature journaling kind of in the wild, not in the confines of this workshop, but just as part of your own practice. And I'm curious if anyone has applied anything that you've learned in these workshops so far to your own nature journaling, and if there's anything that you'd like to share. So does anyone, would anyone like to respond to any of those questions? Sharon?
Yeah, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step away to get the journal that I did some writing in. I think I have something that I want to share, but I have to go take a look at it. So just forgive me for a minute while I step away.
Sure.
And then anybody else can jump in.
I can share some. So something that I have a challenge with that I'm working on is, okay, so when I started out with nature journaling, I was definitely more heavy on the words than the pictures or the numbers. And so I have kind of a tendency to write in big blocks of text. So one thing that I've been working on is how to make the words stand out so that it's easier to read. And so what's been kind of helping has been to break apart the different times that I'll use them. So descriptive words, and then maybe writing that in one kind of an ink, or questions. Maybe that's writing it in a different one, or writing like a huge question mark, like the way Fiona does to go along with it. Or then other times, like ideas for future planning. If a lot of times I use my nature journal as something to go with projects I'm working on. For me, it's hard to just sit still. So I usually will do it about like something I'm already doing, like my restoration sites. So then I build a lot of my language around that. Or then another thing might be the results or observations. So I try to think about ways that I can format different kinds of words into ways that make it more easy to read and come back to later. So that's something I'm working on right now, categorizing my words and purposes of them.
So you mean like on the page, visually being able to see what you're doing with the words instead of just having like all the words throughout the whole page.
I can
Yeah.
give an example if you're interested.
Sure.
Okay, so sorry. Here's an example of what maybe an old one would look like in my garden journal. Well, it's not mine, it's a work garden journal, but like I used to just write down all of the things that we did or all of the observations in words. But it's kind of difficult to read and to find anything distinctive about that, even when I put pictures. And so here's an example where I got a bit better about organizing. It's still a page full of text, but I wrote things out in different colors. So I wrote down all my descriptive words in a column in the color black. And then all my questions were here in blue so that it was easier for me to come back and find them. And then my idea about more investigations that I wanted to do were here in orange, so that then it's easier to distinguish from here. And then I was writing down follow-up ideas that friends gave me in green, and then over here, writing down a sequence in brown, and then in dark blue over here a description. So even though it's a page full of text, it's a lot easier to look and focus on different parts of the text instead of like my garden journal where it was all just kind of written together and difficult to distinguish. So that's something I'm still kind of working on, but.
Okay, cool. And do you use those same colors on like all the time, or is it just that one particular page? Like this color is for this and this color is for this?
I definitely need to do more consistency because I don't necessarily use the same colors each time, but I'd like to. But what I do is I always carry 2 or 3 different colors on hand so that I can write, so that even if I don't remember the color themes, I can at least write things out in different colors, and it makes it easier to find just anything on the page. And then plus it kind of looks more like a conversation, which.
Oh, that's cool. It's like a conversation with yourself. And that really shows your thinking. Like that's, I know in some of the college level, writing classes that I took, it kind of shows that's the difference between writing at more of a high school level, like just writing an essay versus writing academically or analytically. It's more of a conversation between different authors or different texts that you're analyzing and your own thoughts. And so that's really cool. You're kind of getting at that same idea there. It's more of, a conversation. And I just want to say one more thing about Yves, and then Sharon, you can go.
Right.
This is something I've mentioned a little bit in these workshops before, kind of offhand, that, when you talk about writing to think versus writing to communicate, I had the thought that it's kind of also writing to communicate with ourselves. If we want to write in a way that makes it, that we could show it to someone else, but also when we're looking back at it later, it can make sense to us most easily. And so that's, on the one hand, I think it's good to be able to not worry about what it looks like visually and to just be able to, write as freely as possible without worrying about that. But it is also useful to have it in a more visually organized way. So it's kind of a trade-off, I think, and it kind of just depends on what anybody wants at a particular time, what you're trying to get out of your nature journal. So I wouldn't say there's anything, wrong with what you did in that older notebook that you showed. But if the way that you're doing it now is more useful to you, then that's great. And that's something that I'm still trying to explore for myself, because a lot of times my notebooks are more just like, here's an entire page full of text. And that's useful in a way because I can just write and not worry about it. But it is also useful sometimes to or have it more organized. And I feel like I'm rambling, so I will let Sharon talk now.
So we had the session where we interviewed something in nature. And so I think that makes a nice connection with this idea of animacy. And during that workshop, I was kind of thinking about, I'm sure that you have these plants in your area, Rebecca, the snowdrops that emerge just as the snow is melting, or sometimes even when snow is still on the ground. They're, like the very, very first signs that winter will end. And mine are gone now here in Southeast Michigan, but I wrote about them during that workshop. Like I was thinking, I didn't actually interview them as much as I would have liked, but it really has an animacy in it. And this is what I came up with. I drew pictures of the snowdrops. And then in my rock garden, you can probably see that little picture there. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. They kind of march up the slope, the terrace slope of the garden. And so when I shared it at my rough draft during that workshop, and I smoothed it out a little bit, cleaned it up a little, but it was still kind of like thoughts strung together. So I wrote on that page, gazing at the snowdrops that bloom on the ascending terraces of the rock garden, I envision them as soldiers in white and green uniforms. We are marching up the terraced walls. A small advanced platoon has scouted in December and January before the frigid temperatures and frequent snow storms of February came. Now we look tattered, bedraggled, threadbare, and beaten. Our full battalion appears fresh, ready, and eager. And so I asked the questions, what is the command to start the march? Is it temperature, the length of days? So yeah, that's what I came up with, using that interview as a launch, although it wasn't really quite so much an interview as I might have liked, but animacy for sure.
Yeah, I remember when you shared that in the workshop originally. So it's exciting to hear that you worked a little bit more with that. And yeah, you're right. That is something that I was kind of trying to get at in that workshop, is how, so for those of you who weren't there, I had everyone interview each other first, like asking each other questions to try to learn something about each other. And then we did interviewing an organism. And so as scientists, we want to avoid anthropomorphism, because we don't want to assume that we know what it's like to be another creature. We don't want to assume that we don't want to put our own human experience onto them. But I do think that we can imagine what it's like to be someone else. And this is what I said in that workshop, is science is important and imagination is important. And we can use both of them as long as we're clear about which one is which. I think that it's fine to imagine what it might be like to be this other creature, as long as we know that's just an imagination. Yeah. It's almost like this is a hypothesis. And then we could do more observation to try to figure out if it's true or not. But it's, and what do I want to say next? And I was playing with this a little bit more after that workshop too. And I think what I think is interesting is that, so for example, I saw some geese flying overhead, and I didn't have my notebook with me at the time, but I just started thinking about questions. Like if I wanted to ask one particular goose in that big V of geese flying, questions about it, I realized that the questions that I was thinking of were a lot more interesting than if I were just thinking about geese as one thing, as one species. If I focused it on one individual, as though I were asking another person some questions, then I felt like I just started to care about it in a deeper way and ask more interesting questions. And then I still could change those questions to be a little bit more of a scientific way, and that I could investigate them scientifically if I wanted to. But I think just the idea of that, making that connection first, like with an individual, is really interesting to me. And I think, and as scientists, you're supposed to be objective and more kind of distant from something. But I think also having that, creating that empathy and caring about something can also help us to be more curious about it. And yeah, I saw you briefly unmuted yourself. Do you want to add something?
I had a question, just because I was thinking about what you were saying about anthropomorphizing, and it's true that like we have to be careful about that. Is it okay? This is weird. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but suppose that you say something kind of with a sense of humor about it. How do you draw the line between sense of humor and going too far with anthropomorphizing? The example, okay, this is a random example, it's coming to my mind, but recently I was doing a restoration and there was poison oak. And so I jokingly say the poison oak likes to hug the eucalyptus, or it likes to hug the what you call it, the French broom, and then I'll kind of like joke about the poison oak being all like, "Hey BFF," and hugging them. But is that too far or anthropomorphizing, or is that just more like sense of humor that kind of makes it easier to remember? It's weird to ask this way. What do
Oh,
you all think?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I don't think there's a one right or wrong answer. I'm sure different people will have different opinions, sometimes maybe very strong opinions in different ways. But I mean, my perspective personally is, well, first of all, I think it depends on the context, and it depends on what your purpose is. For example, if someone is a comedian, they're looking for things that are funny. That obviously is very okay. Because nature can, nature can inspire all different kinds of writing, including something that's funny or comedic. And I think, like you said, it could be, putting that image is a lot, it's a lot more evocative than just, kind of dryly explaining but of course, if we are trying to really understand these species, saying that something likes it is, it might be anthropomorphism. We don't know if something likes this, or if it just exists in that way, or has this adaptation or this behavior. Actually, I was just talking about this the other day when I was on a walk with my family member, when I was saying like, oh, this plant likes to do this. And I was saying, well, of course, I know that it doesn't really, or I can't assume that it likes this. I might say that it, has an evolutionary adaptation to do this behavior, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, but because I personally know that, I'm fine with just saying that, oh, it likes this or it wants this, because I know that for me, it's just kind of a shorthand, and I know it's not literally true. So I guess those are some of my thoughts on it right now. Again, everyone will have a different response. Christiane, what do you think?
I think when we have this impulse to see something funny in nature, it's like it reminds me of. It's like this prompt from Jack, and when we are humans in a natural world, and perhaps it's some kind of connecting with nature too, to see some kind of similarities in nature. Yes, of course, we can't do this too far, as the anthropomorpho this these guys in the last century about you, Rebecca, talk in another workshop, but I think it's a kind of trying to get some kind near to nature too. In my journals, I ended up with some kinds of comic, cartoon-like pictures with bees or wasps with question marks over their heads or something like that, which is not the real thing, of course, but for me, there are situations, yes, which reminds me of something as if the boss would like to ask a question or something like that.
I have a question. What is the difference between the anthropomorphism and personification?
Yeah, that's a great question. So anthropomorphism is ascribing human characteristics to to something that's not human.
Mhm.
So like just for now, when we said that like this plant wants this, or the plant is hugging the tree. And oh gosh, I might need to double check on this, because I was like, yeah, I know that. That's, middle school English. And now I feel like I'm kind of forgetting. So
Because I sort of thought that that was what personification was. So I can look the words up. I just was wondering in your mind what was the difference. And then my other question is that what if the whole page or pages is written that way and it's supposed to be humorous, the whole thing?
like if you have
In terms, or I mean, in other words, the audience of one is really for myself. And if you do the whole thing as a humorous thing.
I think that's great if that's your style and that's what you want to do with it. That you
And I
definitely
wasn't,
have.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I
good.
can't see your face on the screen, so I can't tell when you're talking. But I was just meaning like not your whole journal, but just one page or one, observation or interview or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely do a humorous page in your nature journal. And yeah, I didn't mean to say that that's your style. That's what you always do. I think we can all experiment with all different kinds of ways of doing our nature journal. Like maybe one day we are doing things in a very scientific way, or maybe another day we're doing things in a storytelling kind of a way, and maybe another day we're doing the humor.
Mhm.
Okay, Ivea commented in the chat. Are you talking about the personification anthropomorphism question?
Oh no, sorry. I wanted to type it down before I forgot it. I didn't mean to interrupt you all. I'm sorry. I don't know the difference either between anthropomorphism and personification, but now I want to know because I love the distinction between words like that. But I was just thinking while you all were saying that maybe it's also a difference in how we act, because saying something humorous in our nature journal, but then still treating nature like nature, that sounds very different than being sort of like Timothy Treadwell, who decided to go way too far in anthropomorphizing the bears that he hung out with all the time. And that led to a very tragic end with him. So maybe that's sort of a difference too. It is just the way that we treat nature. If we remain cautious and respectful of, not always knowing what nature is capable of. Just a thought.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that story, but so have
What
to
is
look
his
it up.
name again?
Timothy Treadwell. You might have heard of the movie Grizzly Man. I won't go into too much detail, but he was a photographer who seemed to really like the bears in Alaska. And so
Mhm.
for 13 summers, he would go up there, but he wouldn't listen to I think it was like Fish and Wildlife Service, or maybe the Forest Service, about keeping his distance. And so he would set up camps in places that bears were known to frequent, and even like approach them and do sing-songing with them and feed other wildlife. And he and his girlfriend died very tragically.
I think I heard of them, but I didn't know their names. Well, thank you for pondering my question with me.
Yeah, and so from what I remember, personification was always taught as more of kind of a literary device. Like if you wanted to say, for example, this, I don't know, the tree is waving or something to that, like using human characteristics to describe something that's not human. Whereas anthropomorphism is saying that, like almost more like a metaphor, whereas anthropomorphism is saying that this is how the thing actually is. Kind of like it's a misrepresentation, whereas personification is more just a description. I think that might be the difference, although honestly, I need to double check because it's been a while since I thought about personification specifically. So thank you for reminding me about that.
And after all, they do have, they're close, you know, they're sisters or brothers.
Yeah, they're definitely similar
They're
concepts.
siblings. Yeah.
Right, because if I think anthropomorphism, like to an extent, it's not harmful if we're, well, scientifically, if we're trying to, if we want to develop empathy with non-human creatures, I think to an extent that can be a good thing, or at least as long as we know that it's not exactly true. But you're right, Eva, that sometimes if it's taken too far, that can be dangerous, both to us and if we have a misunderstanding of nature or other creatures, or we have misconceptions, that's not helpful, because we want to understand things the way that we really are, not just our own projections onto them.
An example of it being harmful, I think of how people react to the wolf population and become and think of wolves as being evil and predatory, and something to be feared. And you know, it's been kind of a cultural trope, so that there's resistance to reestablishment of wolves in, you know, the ecosystems where that would benefit from their presence.
Right, or kind of like Ivea's answer or example, if you go too far the opposite direction and you're like, oh, these animals are nice and they're our friends, and you know, then that can lead to people behaving in a way that is inappropriate to act around predatory wild animals. And that can lead to bad things happening, which then make people think that, oh, they're all dangerous, we need to get rid of them.
That's a good point. That makes me think of it, like if you feed, like if people start to think, oh, they're our friends, and then they start feeding the wildlife, then the wildlife starts to come more around human dwellings, and then they're called, and then they might get aggressive if they're looking for food, or they might not, and people just think, oh, they're coming too close, they're aggressive, and then they kill the wildlife, or the government kills the wildlife. So it's sort of like what you're saying too, is like having a balance, seeing it as it truly is, instead of going too much like, oh, they're all evil, or oh, they're all, you know, our friends, seeing them, like you said, just as they are, because then you can understand what their actual nature is a little bit better. Just makes me think of,
Forgive my interruption. It was my doctor's office calling. So,
Oh, that's all right.
but I'm going to call them back.
But I like what you said, Rebecca, about how, you know, you start out thinking that they're your friends, but then bad thing happened, and then you go all the way to the other extreme. It makes a lot of sense when you say it like that too, about how one overreaction can lead to another.
right? How that can affect the public perception of these things, and that can have real impacts on, you know, issues in wildlife management or conservation. So words are important, and the way that we think about these things, it's important.
You were asking for some ideas about things that we'd like to work on in the future. We did have that presentation about haiku with Jack a while ago. I would like to spend some more time on that. And actually, it was not necessarily the traditional form of haiku that I'd like to maybe look at some traditional haiku and think about whether I would like to work harder on getting that format, you know, that particular style, or whether I just want to continue with my more informal haiku style that isn't the true Japanese sourced material. So just a thought that I would like to work on that some more with some guidance.
Yeah, I think that would be fun to spend some more time on haikus and go a little deeper into that. And wasn't it Jack who called it maiku? If it's not exactly 575, it's just close. He called it maiku.
And it was so if my understanding of haiku is like the first two lines generally describe the scene or the situation or the object, and then the third line is supposed to give some sort of insight about it. But I'm not really, I can't say that that's true, but there's a certain format that is a little bit more sophisticated than what I do.
Christian?
Yes, I'm an adult educator in Germany, and I studied literature and linguistics, and I did many haiku workshops, and I teach very many haiku workshops. And you are right, Sharon. This form is I think it's not really possible to put this Japanese tradition into our Western languages, but we can try to count these syllables and these lines to get near to the idea. And this thing that you have the two lines with a description, kind of description, it's often so that in the third line is kind of inside. Other haikus there have in the third line kind of contrasting element in nature. So you can put two observations in one haiku
Yeah.
to create a kind of atmosphere. This insight is more kind of modern in it's relative. It's modern. It's 19th century haiku. This came later,
Mhm.
but it's I think there's always some kind of insight when someone write a haiku. He or she observed something which only he or she noticed. So it's some kind of very personal, like we draw something in our nature journal, and another one who sits at the same spot perhaps drew something something else. So there are very subtle things behind this very short piece of writing. I like this kind of writing very much because I think it's perfect for nature journaling too. And I use it when I couldn't draw something, perhaps a bird just flew away and I can't catch it, but I can write about it. And this was, I think, Ify oder Ife? How do you?
Ivea.
Ivea.
It's a weird.
Third try. Okay, Ivea talked about earlier that you have where do you put this writing, and can I do a whole page or do some kind in this drawing where I put it, and these 3 lines you can put everywhere, perhaps in the sky, or when you have water everywhere you can write it in this place, or when you have something, okay, what can I draw there, you can write something there. I think it's fun to do this in a nature journal.
I would also really love to hear more about haiku, because I didn't know those things that you both were just saying. I didn't know any of that about haiku before, that it was supposed to be those. So yeah, it would be really fun to do more of that. I'm going to also put a link into the chat of Jack and Beth's recent workshop, just in case anybody wondered what that was all about. But I would love to hear more about that too.
Thanks, Yvette. Yeah, I think haiku is really fun too. It's really just about capturing one moment, and like you both were saying, it's, you know, the description, and then often it is done so that the last line is kind of the twist, or the, here, you know, here's the bigger, showing the bigger idea that this one little thing connects to, which is really cool.
So one of the things that leapt to my mind that would be a good subject for a haiku that has that little twist at the end is water. So, you know, a gently flowing stream being the subject of the first couple of lines, and then the destructiveness of a flood, or, you know, as the third line, just the contrast between the 2 different aspects of water flowing.
Oh, or what if you showed like a little tiny creek or something small, but then if you look closely, that is a flood to,
Yeah.
you know, the little ants that live there, or the
Right,
seed
yeah.
that's getting washed away, or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways it could be approached.
Just an idea I thought of just now. Okay, so it is 1 o'clock. I want to thank you all for coming.
Yeah, even though we didn't have a topic, I think this was a fruitful conversation.
So I do want to, this was supposed to be today, but I will push that to next week when I'm feeling a little better, and hopefully when the link is working and we can get some more people. But yeah, I'm glad this conversation was useful for you. And if any of you do want to stay and chat a little bit longer, I can stay a few more minutes. So again, I just talked about, do you have any questions about anything we've done in any of the workshops so far? What are some of your challenges using words in nature journaling? What would you like to work on or grow your skills in? And do you have any ways that you like to use words in your nature journal that you could share any tips or ideas with everyone? And have you taken anything from these workshops and applied it to your own nature journaling outside of the workshop?
I'm excited about all of these questions to the point that I think that I might actually sit and journal answers to them for a while in between this week and the next, because I think that you asked some really, really good questions. So I'm excited to, I already have ideas, but I want to explore more. So I'm thankful that you.
That's a great
So
idea to journal about it.
That's
the,
great. And if you do journal about it, I'd love to hear what you come up with. If you have anything you'd like to share after that. Sharon, I think I just interrupted you by mistake.
yeah, the session that we had on wonder and awe and coming up with different words to talk about that feeling. I'd like to maybe look at other common themes in nature journaling, like weather or geographical formations or plant life, and just come up with interesting words to describe those things as well. Because when we came up with a wonderful, very diverse list of words and that were useful. And I like to have, a little pool that I can dip into occasionally for some of these other things that we write about commonly. So, it could be a little session where maybe we did 4 or 5 different concepts and just come up with lists of words to describe those concepts.
That's a great idea. And it's similar to something that's crossed my mind before. As you know how Jack has a weekly session where he's like, this week we're going to learn how to draw plants or reindeer or whatever. We could kind of do the same thing with writing. It's like, okay, if we want to, paint a picture or, write about a certain subject, how could we write about plants in an effective way with words or weather or rocks, like you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great idea.
I agree. That would be a lot of fun. You're kind of okay. This is kind of a silly idea for me, but no, I like the idea. Sorry, I need to stop.
That's silly.
But no. What I was going to say is, I have this idea that maybe y'all know how there's sometimes way too much vocabulary in a new subject. And so I have this book of plant vocabulary that talks about the surfaces and stuff, but they're all really, really technical terms. I thought it would be fun to look through them and then to write them in more, in words that are a little bit more easier to grasp.
That would be fun.
Yeah, just a thought. Like, let me see if I can get an example here. I carry my book with me a lot. I have this book, it's called How to Identify Plants. And so at some point they talk about like the surfaces of the plants. And so they have a list of things like glabrous or comos or ciliate or scabrous or scurfy. And those are exciting words, but they're all very technical. And it'd be fun to just look through them and come up with better, like more human words that aren't so scientific, or like uncinate or glaucodate or barbalate. It's like, okay, but we can have evocative words in non-scientific language too. Just
yes, yeah. So I'm sure one of those words refers to a surface that is waxy, but can we come up with other ways to describe a waxy surface? Yeah, or something that's fuzzy or like
and I can imagine 2 purposes for this exercise. It could be, one, if you spend some time coming up with different ways to describe these terms, it could be a way of learning these terms. So then if you want to use them more scientifically, but then also, like you said, being able to explain them in a more everyday way, that can be the trouble with scientific writing. Sometimes it's not very accessible. Like, how do we write about things scientifically in a way that is accessible and exciting to an average person?
That kind of goes along with, I've forgotten the Irish writer's name. Ward was her last name, I think.
Mary Ward.
Yeah. She was talking about describing what she was seeing under the microscope using household ideas, very, commonplace things. And so it's kind of Via's idea is, to describe things in more commonplace language so that it's more understandable and memorable, perhaps.
Would similes be appropriate? Like fuzzy, like, I don't know, a mohair sweater.
Yeah, yeah, similes can be a great thing to use too. And Christian, I do see your hand up. I was trying to get to you as soon as this little conversation wrapped up.
Yes, thank you. What? Okay, I discovered this workshop only last week, and since today I try to do the other workshops at YouTube, and so I thought, oh, there are 2 workshops that I missed, and so I didn't want to put you under pressure, Rebecca. This first one that I would like to say, and the second one is this video about interview a creature. It comes to my mind is, for me, it's, I think this is good for writing a little poem, to speak in the voice of creature in nature. I think I can imagine that it's good for poetry. So you asked, have you applied anything from this workshop? Not yet, but this idea came to me. And in the chat, I asked whether you know this Edith Holden, The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. So Evea asked, is she a fellow nature journal? No, she is a bit old for that. She lived at the beginning of the 20th century in England, but she made beautiful pages and very creative, I think, very creative use of text and perhaps you can see it writing. So we have text and drawing. So we have little sketches and text, or on an other page we have more text and a picture. She often write down poetry from other authors in her journal. Or here we have a page, very beautiful page of March, with little info texts in it, or a very long text only with some kind of frame around it. And there she is. And so in this, I think it's early time, she did what we try to achieve, and it's in England, it's I think kind of how do you say, it's a classical book. I don't know how you can translate it from German into English, but it's relatively well known, I think. Yes, you write it down here. Thank you. So this I would like to show you, how you can deal with text and pictures in a very free and easy way, I think.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm not familiar with that book, so I'm definitely interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, there's a modern day journaler, Hannah Hinchman, A Life in Hand or A Trail Through Leaves, or I think she has a third book. She does something very similar, and her text is interwoven all around her drawings so that it might follow the contours. If she's describing, for example, a geographical feature, she might have it written along the banks of the river, or going up the slope of a mountainside, or she uses the text to express the ideas visually as well as conceptually. So yeah, look into Hannah Hinkman, I'm not sure, Hinchman. I think her book, some of her books are mentioned in the book list that Avea is keeping, what is in Google Docs. So
Yeah,
I
that's
just looked her up, and it says she taught at Wild Wonder before too.
yeah, she has. Yeah. So her books have been, that was my first inspiration to get really into nature journaling. So I really like her work a lot. But I'm gonna have to say goodbye. I've got to get a call back made to the doctor's office.
Right.
Goodbye.
Bye, Sharon. Thanks for coming.
Bye, Sharon.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to take off too. I'm sorry if I had technical problems getting on today, and so I hope it wasn't disruptive, but thank
No,
you.
it wasn't. I'm sorry you were having trouble.
Yeah, well, I got it worked out, but thank you very much. I'm going to watch the recording so I get the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
good to see you.
Yes,
Doug.
I'm sorry that I came late. This time we had this change of from winter time to summertime, and I was confused with the time zones, and so. But now I know. Okay, it's for me. It's 6 p.m. in the afternoon here.
Did you just have your time switch?
Yes.
Yeah, ours, it was a couple weeks ago now here, so I realize it gets confusing when we have our time change, but then other
Yes.
places didn't change it, but then you do change later, and how do we all stay on track with each other?
Yeah. But I think now we are on the same level. Okay.
Well, I'm glad that you came, and I'm glad that you came anyway, and weren't afraid to come in late, because I'm really glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Okay.
Right. Well, it sounds like this might be a good time to wrap up, unless anyone has any other burning questions or things you want to talk about.
Just that I'm really excited, and now you've given me lots of activities to do this week. I'm super inspired by this, by today in this workshop. So my first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go try to write down all of the words I can think of that associate with fog.
Mhm. Yay, I'm glad this was exciting and gave you some inspiration. Yeah, and I'm so happy to have you here today too. And I hope we'll see all of you next time.
Thank you so much for leading these, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was very inspiring. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
See you soon,
Bye.
Rebecca. at the
Bye.
Yeah, see you later too.